What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks onto a talk show stage, only to realize the host didn't do his homework? The result? A late-night meltdown that no one could have predicted. Mark Wahlberg, known for his no-nonsense attitude and tough Boston roots, was booked for what was supposed to be a routine promotional appearance on The Tonight Show. But what unfolded instead was one of the most awkward, tense, and explosive interviews in recent late-night history, culminating in Wahlberg walking off the set while the audience sat in stunned silence. If you've ever wondered how fast a lighthearted interview can nosedive into chaos, you'll want to watch this to the end. And don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment, because this one's going to leave people talking for a long time. The evening began like any other episode of The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon. The crowd was buzzing, the band was in full swing, and backstage, everything ran like clockwork. Wahlberg was in good spirits. He had done Fallon's show before several times, in fact, while he and Jimmy weren't close, they'd always had respectful, professional interactions. Wahlberg was there to promote his latest action film project he was deeply passionate about. It marked a return to the kind of gritty, physical roles that made him a household name. He was ready to share behind-the-scenes stories, maybe crack a few jokes, and connect with fans. What he wasn't ready for was a host who had other plans. As the show opened, Fallon launched into his monologue with his signature high-energy style. Everything seemed typical until the moment Wahlberg took his seat. "Mark Wahlberg, everybody," Fallon said, clapping along with the audience. "You look great, man." "Thanks for having me, Jimmy," Wahlberg replied, settling into the chair. "Always good to be here. Let's talk about the new movie." Fallon held up the poster, grinning. "Looks intense. Classic Wahlberg. But before we dive in, I've got to ask, something's been making the rounds on social media." Immediately, the mood shifted. Wahlberg's smile faltered. His posture stiffened. This wasn't how these interviews usually started. "What's that?" he asked cautiously. "Well," Fallon continued, "there's been a lot of renewed attention on some things from your past stuff from back in Boston when you were younger. People are wondering if you've really addressed that history the way you should, especially now, given how successful you've become." The studio air turned cold. The laughter stopped. Wahlberg's jaw tightened. "I've addressed those things plenty of times," he said, his tone controlled but clearly firm. "I've been open. I've apologized. I've done the work, and I'm not here to drag that up again. I'm here to talk about the film." Most hosts would have read the room and moved on. Fallon didn't. "But don't you think," he pressed, "that in today's climate, just saying sorry isn't enough? I mean, actions have consequences, right?" The audience started shifting uncomfortably. Wahlberg's publicist was already standing just off camera, visibly tense. Wahlberg leaned forward, his voice sharper now, his Boston accent rising with his frustration. "Jimmy, I don't know what kind of show you're trying to run here, but this wasn't the deal. We're supposed to talk about the movie, not rehash stuff I've spent years taking responsibility for." "I'm just asking what people want to know," Fallon replied. But gone was the playful tone he was known for. This felt pointed, pushed. "Isn't that what good journalism is about?" Wahlberg's eyes narrowed. He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Journalism? You're a late-night comic, Jimmy. You're not Bob Woodward. You want to talk about journalism? Book a panel. This is about trying to get a viral clip at my expense." The room was dead silent. Fallon tried to backpedal. "I didn't mean to upset you, Mark. I just thought we could have an honest conversation." "You want honesty?" Wahlberg said, standing up. "Here's honesty. I came on your show in good faith. I showed up prepared. You blindsided me with tabloid crap, and now you want to spin it like you're doing some kind of public service." Fallon rose too, now clearly out of his depth. "Wait, come on, Mark. Don't do this. Don't walk out." But Wahlberg was already halfway off the stage. "Then maybe next time," he said over his shoulder, "do your homework. Or don't invite guests you don't respect." And just like that, he was gone. Wahlberg stared at Fallon, visibly stunned. "Since when is The Tonight Show about journalism?" he asked, his tone equal parts disbelief and frustration. "You play games with celebrities and read tweets. This show is supposed to be entertainment, not some kind of ambush." The tension between them was thick now, and it was rising fast. Neither man was backing down. Fallon looked determined to steer the conversation into territory that clearly made Wahlberg uncomfortable. While Wahlberg saw it all as a betrayal of the show's format and of the agreement he thought they'd made, "I think our audience is smart enough to handle real conversations," Fallon said, his tone sharpening. "Maybe the problem is you're not comfortable being held accountable." That sentence landed like a punch. Wahlberg's eyes darkened, his jaw clenched. For a moment, the entire studio froze. Not a single laugh, not a single cough, just silence. "Held accountable?" Wahlberg echoed, his voice rising slightly. "Who made you the accountability police, Jimmy? You want to talk about responsibility? Then let's talk about how you told me and my team this would be a straight-up promotional interview. Let's talk about how you're ambushing a guest who came here in good faith." The audience was no longer watching an interview. They were witnessing a full-blown confrontation. The light-hearted atmosphere that The Tonight Show was known for had evaporated, replaced by a heavy, uneasy energy. You could feel it in the room. This was no longer TV. This was personal. Fallon didn't de-escalate. In fact, his next words were what truly stunned the crowd. "Mark, you're getting awfully defensive for someone who says he has nothing to hide," he said, voice laced with condescension. "Maybe the issue here is you're just not used to being challenged. Everyone in Hollywood kisses your feet now, huh?" The audience gasped. Literally gasped. People in the front row exchanged shocked looks. Fallon, the goofy, lovable, harmless, Fallon was gone. In his place stood a man actively trying to provoke his guest into a meltdown. Wahlberg's face cycled through shock, anger, and something that looked dangerously close to pity. "You know what, Jimmy?" he said, voice calm but sharp as glass. "I've been doing this a long time. Sat across from real journalists, tough interviewers, people who could ask hard questions without being disrespectful. What you're doing, it's not journalism, it's not entertainment, it's just cheap." Fallon let out a laugh, but it was a bitter, hollow sound. "What's cheap," he shot back, "is expecting to come on a show and only get softballs while you plug your movie. The days of celebrity worship are over, Mark." "Celebrity worship," Wahlberg snapped, his volume rising. "I didn't come here for worshipy, came here for basic respect. I came here based on what your team promised. A fair interview, a promotional platform. You want to do investigative journalism? Great, but don't lie to me. Don't ambush your guests, and don't act like this is about integrity when it's really about you trying to feel important." The band, usually quick to jump in with a musical cue during awkward pauses, sat frozen. Several crew members in the background looked visibly distressed. Cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of the collapse. Then Fallon made the worst decision of the night. He turned to the audience with a theatrical shrug and said, "Well, folks, I guess we're seeing the real Mark Wahlberg tonight. That line meant to be clever, maybe even funny, landed with a thud. It wasn't clever, it wasn't funny, it was smug, and it pushed things past the point of no return." Wahlberg didn't say another word. He stood up, took a final look at Fallon, and walked off stage. The audience, dead silent. And Fallon? He stood alone behind his desk, face flushed, realizing too late that he had just sabotaged more than an interview. He had sabotaged himself. "The real Mark Wahlberg tonight," Fallon said with a smug smirk, "not the polished movie star, the guy who can't handle a couple tough questions." But the audience didn't react the way he'd hoped. There was no laughter, no applause, just an uncomfortable stillness that settled over the room like fog. People shifted in their seats. Some exchanged awkward glances. Others looked genuinely disturbed, wondering what had gotten into the usually affable host. Wahlberg sat there, eyes locked on Fallon. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, but pulsing with restrained fury. "You just made a huge mistake. Jimmy, you don't know me. You don't know my story. And you clearly don't understand what professionalism looks like. I came here to talk about a movie, something. A whole crew of people busted their asses to make. I came to entertain your audience, support your show. And instead, you turned this into some petty personal ambush. For what? Ratings." Fallon started to interject. "Look, if you can't handle the heat," but Wahlberg cut him off without hesitation. "Handle the heat. This," he scoffed. "This isn't heat, Jimmy. This is amateur hour gotcha nonsense dressed up like hard journalism. You want to see real heat? Try sitting across from people who ask real questions about real issues with actual respect, What you're doing here, it's garbage." The air in the studio was thick with tension. Audience members were now visibly uncomfortable. Some had started recording on their phones. Sensing this was no longer a late-night interview, this was history in the making. Fallon, perhaps realizing he'd lost the room, tried again, but this time, he made a critical misstep. "Maybe. The truth is, you're not as tough as you act in your movies," he said with a smirk. "All that Boston Street tough stuff? Maybe it's just a performance." That line crossed a line. Wahlberg's entire demeanor shifted. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his gaze sharp enough to cut glass. "You want to question my toughness?" he said coldly. "Toughness is growing up in Dorchester with nothing and building a life. Toughness is owning up to your past and working every damn day to do better. Toughness isn't sitting in a safe studio chair taking cheap shots at someone who trusted you enough to sit here. That's not tough, Jimmy. That's cowardly." The power in the room had completely shifted. Wahlberg wasn't just defending himself, he was exposing Fallon. "I think you're taking this a little too seriously," Fallon muttered, clearly rattled. "It's just television, Mark. We're just having a conversation." Wahlberg shook his head slowly. "Just television? You think that gives you permission to deceive people? To lie to my team and then ambush me on camera? No, Jimmy, this isn't just TV. This is my name, my career, my life, and you're using it like a prop in your little ratings game. Not a single laugh, not a single clap, just silence." Fallon tried one last lifeline. "Maybe we just agree to disagree and move on to talking about your movie," he said, voice softening. "I think we've both said enough." Wahlberg stared at him with utter disdain. "Move on," he said. "You think you can throw dirt on someone's name and then flip a switch when it backfires? That's not how it works, Jimmy. You don't get to play the villain and then pretend you're the host again when the mood shifts. Not tonight." The studio was so quiet now, you could hear the faint hum of the equipment and the whisper of someone breathing in the back row. Fallon looked small behind his desk, his usual energy gone replaced by a blank expression of someone who knew he'd just made a catastrophic mistake. This is live TV. Things get heated. It's part of the magic. Wahlberg let out a joyless laugh. "Magic? Is that what this is? You think ambushing your guests, lying to them, humiliating them in front of millions, that's magic? No, Jimmy, that's desperation." Camera operators stood frozen, unsure whether to keep rolling or cut. But no one gave the signal. The producers weren't moving. The audience wasn't breathing. The meltdown was too gripping to turn away. From then, Fallon tried again. "Look, I'm sorry if you feel like I crossed a line," but Wahlberg had heard enough. He stood, slowly, calmly. "You didn't cross a line, Jimmy," he said. "You drew one, then stepped right over it, and now you get to live with that." And with that, Wahlberg walked off the set. No wave, no glance back, just a man who knew his worth, refusing to play along. And Fallon, he sat there, blinking, alone behind the desk, as the weight of his own choices came crashing down around him. Fallon tried to regain control, his voice soft and rehearsed. "Maybe we both got a little carried away," he said, forcing a smile. "Why? Don't we just start over? Talk about your movie, crack some jokes, get back to having fun." Wahlberg stared at him, stunned not with anger this time, but disbelief. His voice, when it came, was cold and sharp. "Start over? You think this is a video game, Jimmy? That you can hit reset and pretend none of this happened? You spent 10 straight minutes trying to humiliate me on national television, and now that it's blowing up in your face, you want to start over?" The audience was frozen, utterly captivated. Some phones were out now, silently recording. Others simply sat motionless, unsure whether they were watching an interview or a breakdown. Either way, it was something they would never forget. "I wasn't trying to humiliate you," Fallon said, voice rising with panic. "I was just trying to have a real conversation for once." "Everyone's so fake on these shows," Wahlberg cut in, voice rising. "A real conversation. You want to have a real conversation. Then let's start with this. Let's talk about how your team called my publicist yesterday and promised this would be a light, fun segment about my film. Let's talk about how your producers assured mine there would be no controversy, no gotcha questions. Let's talk about how you looked me in the eye backstage and told me how excited you were to hear about the project." Fallon's face flushed red, His eyes flicked nervously toward the wings, where his producers stood frozen behind the cameras. Damage control was underway, but it was too late. Mark Fallon said, "I think you're blowing this out of proportion." Out of proportion? Wahlberg's voice cracked, this time not with fury, but with something deeper hurt. "Do you even understand what it feels like to be betrayed by someone you trusted? To come here thinking you're among professionals, only to be set up like some kind of punchline? I've been on this show multiple times. I've shown you nothing but respect." His voice faltered, but just for a beat. The emotion in the room was real and undeniable. He wasn't just angry anymore. He was wounded, betrayed. The audience could feel it, and it had turned them from spectators into witnesses. "I wasn't trying to destroy you," Fallon said, sounding smaller by the second. "I was just asking questions." "Questions?" Wahlberg laughed, bitter and exhausted. "You weren't asking questions. You were making accusations. You took things from my past, things I've owned up to, apologized for, learned from, and you weaponized them. Not because you care, not because your audience cares, but because you thought it would get clicks." The confrontation had stretched far past any normal segment length. Producers were pacing off camera. Some crew members looked genuinely distressed, but no one dared cutaway not with every eye glued to the screen. Fallon tried again, grasping for the last thread of dignity. "Mark, I respect you as an actor, as a person. Maybe I didn't handle this the right way, but I was just trying to bring something real to the interview." Wahlberg's voice dropped again, quiet and cold. "You call that respect?" He leaned forward. "Respect is sticking to your word. Respect is not blindsiding a guest who came here in good faith. Respect is asking if someone's okay talking about personal topics instead of springing them live for shock value. What you did tonight wasn't journalism. It wasn't entertainment. It was a setup." The room was dead silent. You could hear the air conditioning hum, a phone buzz in someone's pocket. The tension was suffocating. No one even moved. "I'm sorry you feel that way," Fallon said. But the words dropped like bricks, lifeless, empty, too little, far too late. "You're sorry I feel that way," Wahlberg repeated, his voice rising with disbelief. "No, Jimmy, you're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry I didn't just sit here and take it. You're sorry your plan to humiliate me on national TV didn't go the way you scripted it." Fallon opened his mouth to respond, but Wahlberg held up a hand-firm final. "You know what? I'm done. I'm done with this interview. I'm done with this show, and I'm done with you. If ambushing people and putting their reputations on the line for ratings is your idea of journalism, then count me out." Wahlberg began to rise. The audience collectively held its breath. Everyone had sensed this moment coming, but watching it unfold in real time was surreal. "Mark, wait," Fallon called out, panic cracking through his voice. "Don't leave. We can fix this. Let's talk about your movie. That's what people really want." Wahlberg paused mid-stride, turned, and shot Fallon a look that was all contempt. "Now you want to talk about the movie? Now after spending the last 15 minutes trying to tear me down, you want to pretend none of that happened? It's too late for that, Jimmy. You made your choice the moment you turned this into an ambush." Fallon was grasping at straws. "The audience wants to hear about your film." Wahlberg shook his head, incredulous. "Don't disappoint them? Jimmy, you're the one who let them down. They came expecting laughs, stories, entertainment. Instead, you gave them a smear job in prime time. They wanted a conversation. You gave them a take." He reached down, calmly removed his mic, and placed it on the table with careful deliberation. Every movement carried the weight of fury, held barely in check. "This," Wahlberg said, looking around the silent studio, "is what happens when people forget that behind the celebrity face is a human being. This is what happens when you treat someone like a prop and expect them to smile through it. This," he looked Fallon in the eye, "is what happens when you confuse being a talk show host with being a journalist, and fail at both." Fallon made one last desperate plea. "Mark, please. Let's finish the interview. Start fresh. We'll talk about whatever you want." Wahlberg regarded him for a long moment, and then, with a voice low and heavy with finality, he said, "Jimmy, you still don't get it. This isn't about an interview. This is about integrity, about keeping your word, about treating people with respect, and tonight you failed on all counts." With that, he turned and walked toward the exit. His footsteps echoed in the silence, each step a statement. The audience sat frozen, watching as one of Hollywood's most recognized faces walked off The Tonight Show, set not in scandal, not in shame, but in protest. Just before he reached the edge of the stage, Wahlberg stopped. He turned back, looked at Fallon still, slumped in his chair, stunned and hollowed. Outan said, "You know what the saddest part is, Jimmy? I actually respected you. I thought you were one of the good ones. I thought you understood that real entertainment doesn't have to come at the cost of human dignity. But I was wrong." And with that, Mark Wahlberg exited the stage. The studio remained in eerie silence. The cameras lingered for a few moments on Fallon's face, blank, stunned, defeated. No jokes, no comebacks. Just the wreckage of a career moment gone horribly. Finally, mercifully, the screen cut to commercial. What did you think of this stunning moment? Was Mark Wahlberg right to walk off, or should he have stayed and fought through it? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe. For more real moments when Hollywood's biggest stars hit their breaking point, in an industry full of glitz, control, and PR polish, every now and then, someone refuses to play by the rules. And when they do, the truth makes for unforgettable television.